What is going on, folks? It's great to see everybody out there on the internet. And if you're catching this on the replay, thank you very much for watching. My name is Kevin Winter. I'm part of the Deno team. And today I am joined by a much smarter, much better, much more handsome member of the Deno team. His name is David Sherrod. David, how are you doing this afternoon, sir?
Pretty good.
Excellent, excellent. So we're here to talk about the 1.37 release of the Deno runtime, which contain lots of exciting upgrades. One of them being the support for Jupyter Notebooks, which is something that we're really excited about. And we actually have a special guest who's going to join us a little bit later to tell us more about it. But before we dive into that, there's just a couple of demos that we wanted to share, a couple sort of things that we cherry picked from the 1.37 release that we wanted to show you because we're really excited about them. And we are live here today. So if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to drop some comments in the chat. I'll be monitoring those kind of off to the side here. So if you see me looking in that direction, that's why I'm doing that. And I'll definitely try to steer the conversation in the direction of any questions that you have, whether it's for me or David or for our special guest joining us in a little while. Feel free to pipe up with any questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. But with that, I'm going to actually share my screen real quick. One moment. So let's go over to the window. And if all is gone according to plan, you should be seeing the 1.37. Which one do you say, David? Do you say 1.37 or 1.37? Which do you prefer?
37, I usually say.
So the actual number. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll standardize on 1.37 as well. And the blog post, which we'll drop a link to in the chat here in a little bit, is where you can go to kind of get an exhaustive rundown of everything that launched in 1.37. But there are a couple of things that we wanted to show you that we think are going to be particularly exciting, particularly useful. And from my side, one of those things is the improvements that launch for Visual Studio Code. So for those of you that use Deno every day, there's an excellent chance that Visual Studio Code is kind of your primary way that you develop for Deno. And there's a few things that launched in the most recent version of the VSCode extension for Deno that have definitely been much appreciated on my side. And I was going to call out just a few of those. So here I have a folder or a directory on my machine that has a Deno project in it. And I have, so this is sort of mostly the default content that's generated by the Deno init command, which you can use to generate a default TypeScript file and then a test, which exercises a function within that TypeScript file. And it also generates a Deno.json for you that will kind of automatically watch your main file. So if you don't use Deno init, just as an FYI, that's a nice way to bootstrap a project quickly. But one thing that you might notice here is that I don't have a .vscode directory within the structure of the folder here. And if you've used the VS Code plugin for Deno before, you'll notice that when you initialize it, you have that VS Code folder, which has the settings for the plugin there. One of the things that launched.
Kevin, are you showing your VS Code window, or?
I should be.
Oh, I only see the blog post right now. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me see if I can do this again. And I actually want to share my entire screen, and that's what I thought I did. But clearly not. So there's VS Code.
Yep, working.
Sorry about that,
okay.
Folks. But yeah, as I was yammering on about, here's VS Code, but there's no configuration file that's in here right now because in the latest version of the extension, it actually looks for a Deno.json file within a VS Code project. And if that Deno.json file is present, it will, automatically configure TypeScript files to use the VS Code extension for Deno. So when I hover over like the Deno namespace, I get my, my documentation help. So autocomplete, all of those things are working without me having to actually take any action. The other thing that you might notice is if you update the name of a file, So if I rename this to new main.ts, the language server for Deno has actually been updated to automatically update imports. So this import that has this TypeScript file here automatically gets updated to the new value when I refactor and rename that file. Another thing I wanted to call out is the ability to disable the plugin for specific paths within your project. We have had the ability to enable certain paths, but now we have kind of the inverse, which is the ability to disable certain paths within a project. So this particular project is actually the new version of the Deno doc site. So you might have noticed recently there's a new docs.deno.com, which is hosting the content that used to be in the manual for the runtime, plus a few new examples and tutorials and dedicated sections for deploy and KV. And this is actually powered by Docusaurus, which is a node-based static site generator that is sort of optimized for creating documentation. And that is a project that sort of assumes that you're using Node, and a lot of the code within Docusaurus in the current version, the 2x version, still uses CommonJS and kind of expect, and actually doesn't work if you try to configure the Node project for Docusaurus like as like an ESM project. So it's actually convenient to kind of turn off the linting and the auto formatting for Deno within the context of like the source directory of Docusaurus. So in my settings.json, which you can find here in this .vscode folder, I have the Deno.disable paths set up for the source folder, which is the place where I'm going to where I actually don't want Deno to help me out with like autocomplete and formatting and that kind of thing. So if you want to disable the extension for a given path, that's the way that you do that. And then the final thing that I've already tipped my hand on a little bit, because you see it here, is this Deno.cache on save equals true. And this is a very small thing, but it's actually kind of something that I'm extremely stoked about, because I suspect if you used the VSCode extension for Deno, this is a thing that you've seen before. So you get this red squiggly line that indicates that you have an uncached or missing remote URL for like one of the modules that you're trying to import. And you usually have to, do a couple. There's a few ways you can do it, but you can just go down to quick fix and cache that. But essentially, there had been a manual step that requires you to cache all of your dependencies before you can start, before code complete starts working and that sort of thing. But within this most recent version of the plugin, I'm going to initialize the workspace here, so I do get that configuration file. But I can take this setting, this Deno cache on save equals true, and if I configure my project with that, now if I make a change here and hit save, it's actually going to automatically download this dependency for me without me having to actually manually cache the dependency in some way, shape, or form. And that's a small thing, but a pretty major quality of life upgrade if that is the behavior you want. For right now, it is not the default. Cache on save is false by default. But in the future, we're hoping to flip that the other way, because we think that that's going to end up being the more intelligent default.
Yeah, and that's one of those settings that you might want to enable globally in the VS Code settings itself. It's if that's the behavior you prefer.
By default, that definitely is true. Like you could,
then you don't need the project level.
Yes, that is probably something that makes enough sense to do globally as well. And if you're like me, you probably also have the editor formatting and format on save also set to true by default. Also something that might be worth thinking about enabling globally as well. And with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing screen and I'm going to turn it over to David to talk a little bit about some improvements that we just shipped for the vendor subcommand as well, or for the cache subcommand, but for vendoring dependencies specifically.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, it seems the window. doesn't have my window. I'm just going to share my entire screen in that case.
Yes.
All
right, screen sharing, the bane of every
do you see it? My
live
screen
code
there?
presentation. I do not as yet. I think it's just us. But there we go.
Oh,
Okay, now
cool.
we get it going.
All right, cool. So yeah, this feature was kind of buried in the blog post because it's an experimental one. But so in the past, say you wanted to vendor the dependencies of this main.ts file. So we have one remote dependency here, which is code block writer. I'm using this this module as an example because it's very simple. But so previously I would have to run Deno vendor main.ts. Let me actually make this bigger. All right, yeah, so a bit bigger. Yeah, so main.ts. And that looks like a lot of information because of how large the text is. But anyways, so what that's done is it's created this vendor folder and it's created this import map. And within here, I have the remote dependencies. And so now we have a different way of vendoring. And you can see here it has an import map for this. So now if I Deno run main.ts, it uses the code in here. So I can, if I put like a console.log, hi, in there, and run, you can see that it outputted that statement that I added. But the annoying thing with the vendor, the Deno vendor command is it's something you have to run manually. Like I had to run this Deno vendor command. And then also when I make any changes in the code here, I have to continually vendor an update as well. Like another annoyance is how the import, like you have to maintain this import map. And if you use another import map in here, anyways, it starts getting annoying. So what this new feature is instead of running the Deno vendor command, you can instead do vendor and then true. And right away, you can see a vendor folder is created. And that's because the LSP has automatically just vendored the dependencies I used here. And you have this folder. You can add console.log. Hi. And then, yeah, you see here that statement that I added. So a nice thing about this is with remote dependencies, I can go to that. Oops. Disable that. If I go to that dependency, if I go to definition, you can see it takes me right to the vendor folder.
Ooh,
Um,
nice.
yeah, so previously, if this is false, and I did go to definition, this will be, yeah, in this folder. Oh, okay, I think it actually took me to the wrong file. I think that's a bug. It's an experimental feature, so let me just
A
restart
little
the
bit of wet
language
paint.
there.
A little bit of wet paint. That's all
Yeah,
good. It's all good. So
so
yeah, when it resolves, it would actually go to the remote version.
yeah, so this goes to the remote one, which is in the global cache, and you can see here I can't edit anything. But once I hit that, change that to true, now I'm back in this local vendor folder. So yeah, once you add more dependencies in here, you never really have to worry about vendoring. It just always happens. It goes in this folder. You basically just set vendor to true, and that's it. So
Sweet.
yeah,
No, that's awesome. So zooming out just a tiny bit because I think we dove right into the demo, but the Deno vendor command or the cache command to grab the dependencies locally, it's a way that you can sort of insulate your code against being offline, or during a build step maybe your server might be offline, and you can take all of those remote dependencies instead of downloading them at runtime. You can store them in a local folder instead.
yeah. And another great thing about this is, like, say you want to, I don't know, change some things in your dependencies or do some like console log debugging. It's really easy to just drop in statements in here, make some edits. So yeah, definitely the for vendoring is just always having your remote dependencies local to the project, and for editing and debugging.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Well, thank you very much for the demo. And those are just kind of two things that we decided to focus on a little bit from the 137 release. So check out the complete blog post to get a rundown of everything that shipped, and including kind of the headline feature for 137, which we're going to talk about next. And David, you are more than welcome to hang out, actually, if you want to chill and hang out in the chat. But I'm going to say goodbye to you for now and have you leave the stage and welcome our next two guests of honor. But thank you very much for hanging out.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right. And with that, let me bring on Kyle and Elijah from Notable to hang out with us. Gentlemen, how are you doing this afternoon?
Hey, great. Good to meet you.
I'm doing all right, Kevin. How are you? Seems
I'm
like
doing
an exciting
great.
time for Deno.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time, especially because like Jupyter Notebooks, I have always kind of looked at enviously. I felt like my Python developer friends like had this superpower that they could bust out whenever they would like. And now I feel like I can take advantage of that superpower as well now that there's JavaScript support. But before we get into all that, I'd love it if you two could maybe just like introduce yourselves, say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your involvement in the Jupyter project is. And maybe Kyle, starting with you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I've worked on Jupyter and IPython since it's got to be like 2012. It's been a while. And so I've been using notebooks like my whole life, because even before that, I was using Mathematica, MATLAB, and Maple and stuff because I was a mathematician, and I really got into using notebooks as a way to experiment, work with like libraries, work with data, and try to figure things out. And so I've been doing open source with that project for a very long time, and now I'm the chief architect at Notable, where we try to provide a really simple interface for people to work with notebooks, still built on top of Jupyter, using all the protocols, which is also why we're able to deploy Deno to it, like literally this past week.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy how fast you were able to move to like get Deno support in Notable. So that was pretty awesome. Well, thank you for the intro. We'll ask you a few more questions and put you to the test in a moment. But Elijah, would you ever be willing to introduce yourself quickly?
I am willing to introduce myself.
Excellent.
So I'm one of the co-founders at Notable. I've got a long background in data visualization with JavaScript, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today and get a bit theoretical along with practical. My experience with notebooks really started, unlike Kyle, I don't think this deep history with notebooks. My experience with notebooks started when I was at Netflix with Kyle. And he pulled me in and he said, wouldn't it be great if every time you emitted a data frame, you got like a BI tool that allowed you to use a UI to interact with your data and explore it. And so we worked together to build an open source data explorer, extremely imaginatively named. You've never heard that name before. And since then, this opportunity came along with Notable. And I really think that notebooks have an incredible power. And I think they're really the raw material for the next, wave of how we interact with data. I think that notebooks, because of their sort of combinatorial form. There's a reason why they've been so popular with scientists, and it's not because they were just sort of forced to use them in grad school. So we've been working at trying to build out a modern notebook that has, like I said, BI tool functionality, a lot of UI elements to allow you to connect to things that we know make notebooks powerful, like secrets management, publishing, Git, things like that. And I think it's really exciting because, I've asked Kyle in the past, why can't I do JavaScript in notebooks? And he said, well, the node kernel isn't there. It's just not, isn't great. And so when Deno started doing this, it was the same kind of excitement I got when we started to build ChatGPT integrations for the notebooks. I think that there's not just like excitement in enabling JavaScript developers to really get into the Jupyter notebook space, but how it changes the kind of work that those developers might do. I think there's some really cool stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very stoked to start exploring the space. It's like I said, like it is now accessible to me in a way that it wasn't before. So I'm really pumped to start digging in. But that's actually maybe a good segue into a higher level question I wanted to ask you both first. So a lot of the folks that are maybe watching this now or will be watching the recording later are JavaScript developers, maybe not super conversant with what is a notebook? Like, what is Jupyter? What problem is it trying to solve? Like, I would love to maybe just get a quick, like, high level explanation of what is this technology? What do people use it for? And maybe start there before we get into the specifics.
Yeah, the way that I look at all of this is, so if you've worked with the REPL, you type Deno at the command line, you type Node at the command line, you type Python at the command line, and it gives you this way to get this like feedback. You're in this read, eval, print loop where it reads your command, it evaluates what you put in, and it prints out some sort of result, and you're just doing that in a loop forever. And when you do it in a notebook, you track it into a document that you can share with other people. And that is actually just most of it. It makes it sound really boring, but like really that's it. It's like creating a log of the work that you did of that session with the REPL. The difference with the notebook, though, is that now you can do rich output. You can have HTML, Markdown, interactive widgets and tables and everything else. And it creates a way for you to do documentation within notebooks themselves. And work between them. And I could present too, by the way. We could start there anytime, and I can go from that.
Let me jump in real quick, because I want to provide a slightly different view as a JavaScript developer. I try to avoid the command line at all costs. I try to avoid any of that full stack stuff. But at the same time, I see the power of server-side JavaScript. And so what I really think is exciting about Deno, like an actual fully fledged TypeScript JavaScript kernel in the notebook, is it's going to take a lot of folks like me who think of themselves just as purely front-end engineers, and we just have to deal with the rest of the stack when we have to, and start to seriously think about changes in workflows when you're using server-side JavaScript, and what does that mean? And I think that there's a huge amount of excitement there, because it gets you into a healthier workflow. I mean, what Kyle was alluding to was like, the notebook isn't some radical, amazing new technology. It's a solid functional technology, because it creates this comprehensible, linear, data-driven document. And being able to work in that, I think, is going to really empower a lot of engineers like me who think of themselves as not full stack engineers. It's going to make them actually start to finally think about what is server-side really for. And I think that that's just, that's super exciting. I've said exciting way too many times. I got to come up with a different word.
It's exciting. What other word? We can come up with some synonyms, maybe, but it is something to be stoked about. And I did actually.
And one more, I'd be remiss if I didn't advertise that one of the cool things is that now you can pull ChatGPT into building your notebooks in JavaScript. ChatGPT knows notebooks because it's a large language model trained on documents. And what do we have? A huge number of documents, notebooks. And it's, trained on JavaScript. And so now you can, and it really understands that sort of linear notebook pattern, that workflow of text and code and processing in chunks. And I think that that's also going to be super exciting. Damn it, I do use it again.
It's going to be a cause for happiness. Maybe, I don't know. We'll come up with some different ways to say it. But yeah, no, that's an interesting thought, just because like it's sort of naturally conversational anyway. Like the content of a notebook, it sort of flows in a very similar pattern. And we'll get into the demo here in 1 second, but one thing that might also be helpful, I noted that you guys both worked at Netflix together doing like data visualization stuff, working in notebooks. And I thought it might be helpful again for folks that maybe are less familiar with what people use this technology for. Could you share a little bit about like what are some specific problems or specific challenges that you used this technology for at Netflix that might help make it concrete for folks?
Let me start with the core use of Jupyter Notebooks, and then Kyle's going to expand into what we discovered that you could also use Jupyter Notebooks for. So the core of Jupyter Notebooks is anytime you're ever exposed to an algorithm anywhere, when Netflix puts a really bad movie in front of you, or when Facebook promotes a content that's terrible, that all started somewhere in a notebook. Like every one of those algorithms started in a notebook where somebody said, load this data, look at the first 10 rows, and process through this data. Jupyter Notebooks are the core tool for data science. And they're used in other ways too, but all of that stuff, whether you're, visualizing a black hole, or you're, creating another algorithm to get more stuff in your social feed, that's all going to start with a Jupyter Notebook. And it's because this is how data scientists were trained in grad school. This is what they became acclimated to. And then it stuck because that document format, what's called literate computing, is such a powerful workflow, and it's such a powerful artifact at the end of it. So, you know, you can go back to a notebook and rerun it, have reproducible results. You can share it with people. They can collaborate within that notebook. And that is, you know, we lose track of just how powerful certain like really good, I don't even want to call it a UI, but like document surfaces are for expanding people's powers beyond just some kind of fancy technology. It's just an amazing space to do research.
For sure. Awesome. Well, yeah, I think now is the time, Kyle. Like the time has arrived for us to dig in and see how this works. If you'd be willing to hopefully share your screen. It's been a little bit dodgy here in the on the stage thus far, but hopefully you're able to do it okay. Oh, there it is. Okay.
You're muted, Kyle.
Okay. You can see a notebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Let's kick it off. And okay, I think we talked about notebooks enough. I need to gush about how much I love Deno. I just have to.
Do it.
So the reason why it was really hard to work with the JavaScript kernel was that you needed to have node modules next to it. And I was like, oh, we could never deploy like a JavaScript kernel because we have to somehow like do an npm install into it. You can't just start a notebook and get going. Whereas in Python, you could like do a bang pip install if you needed to install other stuff. And I love the ESM imports. I love the HTTP imports. Obviously, I love the npm imports. That's just like a specifier to get into. It's just, I'm just so happy. Like this is what we needed for so long for JavaScript. So it just works really easily. And it was really easy to make a package on Deno land. And I realized, you know, there's like people could still put stuff on npm and stuff, but the user experience was so good. So thank you.
Well, thanks, man. That's really, really kind of you. But yeah, like in this environment specifically, like being able to do more dynamic importing and like use URLs directly in the npm specifiers, like without a config file, ends up just lining up really well with this like REPL style of development.
Yeah. So the basics here on a notebook is that you should be able to iterate, and you know you should be able to iterate kind of in chunks, and you look at it a little bit differently than coding. Like I don't do my main software engineering in a notebook. For me, the notebook is a view layer. And, you know, even at Netflix, if, you know, I'm going to query a bunch of data, I get out a bunch of tables and I'm trying to determine like, oh, you know, like which show was most watched last night, you know, it's a view into that data and it's just me exploring it. It's not a software artifact. It's like a knowledge artifact that's a little bit different. But importantly, you know, like I can sit here and I can change a variable, I can try stuff out, and I can just rerun it. And it's just, you know, it's just built-in stuff that's in there. And we get to use all of TypeScript to have at it. So I wanted to pretend like I was going to do a typical, like, if I'm trying to be the like Python pandas data science programmer, I want to pull in the polars library so I can get a data frame out. And so because that's just straight on npm and it's compatible with Deno, I can import polars from the Node.js polars. This display package is something I wrote to kind of wrap what we've started working on in the Deno kernel to make it so you could, you know, create these like rich outputs. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that, like what you can do with your classes to make them, you know, as beautiful as the objects people see in IPython. So.
And Kyle, for the benefit of
the
the front enders out there who might be new to this tech, what's the TLDR on like a data frame? Like what's that? What is that object in that data structure?
So a data frame, it's just a table. It's just a big old table. Yeah,
it's a table. That's true. Yeah, that's a good description. It's a table.
I actually just wrote a blog post about data frames just to step on Kyle.
Go ahead.
A data frame is a table of functionality for summarizing it. Like, I mean, Kyle knows data frames. This is not me coming in and lecturing, but just pitching my blog post. That allows you functionality to summarize it, to aggregate it in different ways and filter it. So it's got built-in functionality that allows you to say, hey, filter this or group by this column or whatever. And then a data frame is also an artifact within a notebook so that a notebook can be told, hey, if you receive a data resource like this, then emit a different kind of output. So folks at home who have seen notebooks, they don't get tables like this when it comes out. They get an HTML table that's very static. This is actually an interactive, filterable table, and it's not just that, it's a whole, we call it DEX. It's basically the advanced version of that Data Explorer I talked about earlier. It does all sorts of stuff, and it does that because the notebook knows, hey, this is a data resource. This is, and in this case, a data frame. So a data frame is both is a table of data. It's functionality built into that that representation that allows you to aggregate it and summarize it, and it's also something that exists within the Jupyter spec, so that developers can say, we might want to present this in rich ways in the output.
Got it. So the data frame is actually a specification that in Noteable, which is the app that we're looking at here, y'all are using that data structure and creating what is like a cool interactive table based on it.
So data frames have been in Python, R, it's in Rust, which is how it got brought to Node. Data frames have been around a really long time, including these like operations where you're going to like group by and aggregate, and like Excel itself is a data frame. In fact, recently, Microsoft launched, like with Anaconda, doing Python in your Excel sheets. And so it was like your entire spreadsheet is actually a data frame you can access from Python in a cell. Instead of like an Excel formula, you just write Python. And that's basically exposing the whole spreadsheet as that data frame.
Cool.
And I think what Elijah was trying to hit on is that we have a way to take the data frame, like when we see the data frame, we produce a different representation so that you can interact with it. And this interactive view is the same interactive view that you would see if you were in Pandas as well, or you were using Python.
Okay, awesome. And for the folks at home, I'm going to take the faces off camera so that you can see a little bit. We have some requests in the chat to zoom in, so I'll give you a little bit more space right here.
And I can also zoom in.
They just didn't want to see us. They're being polite.
Yeah, that's probably true. They're just being polite.
Cool. So yeah, I think I was going to show. So I'm gonna. I'm guessing that there's going to be people here that haven't seen Deno before, and maybe are diving in because the Jupyter Notebook stuff is really cool. And so for those that are diving into it, like you can use fetch directly in Deno, which is like another great thing. Like I hate trying to figure out like which library should I use to do this in Node. I could just use fetch. It just works here. So I can load that data, and then when I'm using this polars library to create a data frame, I just read directly from that CSV, but it's actually tab delimited, so I throw that in, and then display it. And then that piece that Elijah was talking about for trying to work with the data frame. Here, I've got all these columns that I maybe don't care about, or I don't know what I want to work with on it. I'm actually just going to group by continent. And then as I do those groups, I want to make these aggregations that I'm going to, pull a particular column out, sum it, and then, sort of for in this case, take the population of each country, sum them, and call it the total population for that continent. And then on that same continent, calculate the number of subregions by doing this count. So this is just all part of that polars library. And then go back to displaying it. So I've basically done all that aggregation work, and then I bring it back for me to look at and work with.
Nice. So apologies if you're going to get to this, but like if folks are going to use Noteable to and use Deno within the context of the notebook, would you be willing to kind of just show where they configure that? Because I think you have to select or kind of opt into that, right?
So we like just basically recently launched. You can now just click File, New Notebook, and then you can say that you want Deno.
Got it.
I don't know what's going on with my space there. Oh, there we go. Oh, because I'm in a project that I don't have access to. I feel like I should start a new one. Here, we'll go here. Or not. I love live demos. So you log in.
And if you want to use the way that most people are using Noteable these days, you can actually just tell ChatGPT to do TypeScript, right, Kyle?
We can show that. We should definitely show that, because I don't think we've told
that sounds like a
people
pretty sick demo.
that's accessible. But yeah, so you click to create a new notebook, and I'm gonna do it in there. So like show off display. I mean the kernel still has some stuff to work through, so we've labeled it experimental. But you just have to click this kernel language menu down here, switch from Python to Deno, and it'll kick off.
I mean, for being a week old, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I found it to be surprisingly capable, and Kyle's display library is very neat too. Definitely, if you're going to do any kind of hacking with this, definitely recommend checking it out.
Yeah. Where should I go next? Should we show off the display thing? Should we make ChatGPT do stuff, or should I show the rest of? Look, you can use D3 server side.
D3 server side. Let's go there first. That's actually kind of fun.
Sweet. Now Elijah's he's written a book on D3. This is me writing D3. And so I don't really know what I'm doing. And I end up just drawing to canvas directly. But what I loved here is that D3 was actually fine getting so I'm going to refer to this as a series. You can also think of it like a list. So I'm saying get that column. So I say get the max out of that column. I'm going to get the max out of those values. And then I'm going to go ahead and scale the X scale and the Y scale for the chart that I'm going to make up ahead. And I just pass directly in that data frame. So it's like people are able to work as if they were doing pandas, Python work, when they want to work with their data frames, but now they can do it with D3 in a notebook and then draw directly to a canvas. And so I load the Skia canvas module here, and then I just work across the records directly, and I'm just drawing right to the canvas, and then I display the canvas, and out pops that population chart from before.
It's not too shabby. It's like the JavaScript, it turns out, is pretty good at doing front end things. Like who would have?
It occasionally.
Who'd have thunk it?
But can I? Do you mind if I present? I want to show now. I feel
sure.
like concerned that this is the level of D3 that we're offering out.
I knew. I just have to. I need to tell you.
I thought it was
while he gets
pretty
that
good,
ready,
I
I'm going to tell a
No,
tiny
it's
story.
amazing. It's amazing.
While you present. So, when we were at Netflix and I wanted to get Elijah to work on this data explorer because I got this like format into pandas, and I was like, here, look what I did with Plotly, Elijah. I've used this. Do you think you could do any better than this? I was like, because this is what all the data scientists are going to use at Netflix now. And he's like, I have to make this better. So you just have to put bad code up there.
I mean, one of the amazing things is exposing this so that we can use not just whatever I've written or the built-in functionality in Notable, but Kyle's got examples of using all sorts of different libraries like Vega or like observable plot, and everything's available to you now. And I think that's tremendously exciting. You all can see a notebook. It says let's use D3 in Canvas, right?
We can.
Excellent.
Yep,
okay. So, I'm not going to go over the parts of it that Kyle's touching on. But fundamentally, what's really interesting here is if we're going to do server-side stuff, I would say we should do Canvas. Now, you can do SVG in Deno, and I'm sure that the JSX functionality is going to scale pretty quickly. But I actually think that we've gotten a little bit too wedded to SVG when it comes to doing D3. So a lot of folks don't even know that you can do canvas drawing with D3. They assume that D3 is tightly coupled with vector graphics. And that's because D3 typically exposes this data binding pattern where you select actual nodes in the DOM and you bind data to it. But anybody who's used D3 with React or Vue or anything like that has experience with actually using D3 to generate all the drawing instructions and then render those drawing instructions using Vue or React or Svelte or whatever. And it's a similar thing when we're doing this with Canvas. So this is an explanation, just trying to get you up to speed on what Canvas does, what notebooks do. And fundamentally, using that Skia Canvas library, we create a canvas, we get the context, and then we grab some D3 functionality. For instance, this is an arc generator. What this does is it takes some instructions and turns it into drawing instructions for a path element in SVG, the D attribute of that path element. And you have to go through and you have to give it some data. You have to pass it to a pie constructor. So a pie chart is actually a remarkably difficult chart to create. Everybody knows this from learning D3, like that to make a pie chart, you don't just call D3 pie. You have to run pi on your data. It creates drawing instructions. You have to pass those to an arc. You have to bind that to whatever. But instead, what we do is we take that array of arcs, which is your data that's been, so it's taken these 3 data points and it's split them into 3 slices of a pie, and it's given drawing instructions for each of them that's scaled to whatever parts of a whole this value represents. We iterate through those arcs, and then we call that drawing generator to create the path instructions. However, since we're not applying this to an SVG path, we're applying this to Canvas. We use the path to D functionality that's built into Canvas to translate those SVG drawing instructions into Canvas drawing instructions. And what you end up with is pie chart. And that's using Kyle's display library. It's got the right data set for a pie chart because it's all about whether or not people hate pie charts, which for those who do data visualization know that that's a living topic. And then if you wanted to label it, then you can just draw the text on top of it. And if you want to get more sophisticated, you can actually build things like network charts, which people might think is challenging because typically the example of force-directed network diagrams in D3 show them in an animated form. You animate and show the sort of simulation as it expands and studies into a recognizable structure. But if you want, you can actually run that simulation. This is just a traditional Les Miserables data set, which is a common social network for people to show off examples like this. You can take that D3 force simulation and actually you can run it server side behind the scenes without having to animate the running of that data set, and then just plot the positions that it determines. I think what's real nice about this is that Canvas, to folks who come from SVG and they expect those sort of crisp graphics, think, oh, well, this isn't as high resolution as I want. Canvas has a lot of features under the hood that allow you to do all sorts of cool, fun things to make your graphics more attractive. And I'm going to stop there because that's the end of my notebook. That's a public notebook, and we'll share it. But what I wanted to talk about just briefly is that if folks are more focused on this workflow where they're creating static graphics, they're going to be more thoughtful about static graphics. They're not going to sort of rely on some of the bad patterns that exist with using SVG graphics and some of the drawbacks of SVG graphics, like overloading the DOM with too many elements. And think more deeply about that final product in a way that these things are actually shared. Like most people who are making decisions out of data visualization aren't using your interactive display. Most people don't even interact with interactive displays. They're probably making their decisions based on a screenshot that ended up in a Google Doc somewhere. And so if we think more deeply about like, what does it mean to render static graphics in a sort of reproducible way in this linear fashion in the notebook with text around it, I think that's going to do a great service to the data visualization community and how we approach data visualization. Awesome.
That is true. The static graphics do end up, in front of decision makers just as often as the more interactive versions in the notebook do. And Kyle, because you teased it a little bit, I would actually love to see like what the integration is with ChatGPT and like how you would actually use it in this context, because it wasn't actually obvious to me when you were describing it. Like how would I use these technologies together? All right, we'll bring you back here.
Everybody can see chat. Here we go. Let's do this. Okay. So on the ChatGPT, so if you have Plus, ChatGPT Plus, then you can go to plugins, you enable plugins, and then you can go to the plugin store. And if you look in the popular plugin section or you type in Notable, you can install the Notable plugin. And we would have to update the manifest to say this, but we do more than Python, SQL, and Markdown now. So, but here's what I'm going to do, because I don't know if it knows about it, but I'm going to say, hey, list the available runtimes on Notable. I want to use the Deno kernel. And then, so what this does is it reaches out to Notable, finds out that there's a TypeScript Deno package. So this is like what happened under the hood. available runtimes. These are all the different runtime types and hardware sizes that are available. And so now I could say, and let's see if it's listening. Would you? Yes. Make me a notebook.
Are you a person who thanks ChatGPT like after it does stuff for you?
It depends on my mood. I say thank you, and then other times I'm like, seriously, why'd you do that?
I do like sometimes like try to give like gentle feedback. I'm so Minnesotan that I like try to phrase it nicely to ChatGPT. Like I wasn't quite what I was looking for, but
and I'm gonna tell it, let's make me a prime number generator. I don't know. Let's do that. And while it does that, so you guys see the whole window, right? So I should be able to go here. So it created this notebook. And then what's happening now is ChatGPT is writing out the cell that it wants to see inside of the notebook. Oh, look, it already knows the answers. It's like, why'd you even make me do that? All right, and then if we go over here, it wrote this code and ran it. And so you could be like, oh, that's neat. And you could ask it to do anything you want in JavaScript by telling ChatGPT to go do it in your notebook.
And Kevin, going back to what you were saying earlier, why notebooks really work for ChatGPT and any of these sort of chat-based LLM interfaces is it is fundamentally the same call response structure. And what's exciting about it is rather than it coming back with just an answer that says, hey, I wrote this code and I did this thing, or here's this chart, you actually have a reproducible, collaborative, and extendable artifact at the end, right? You have a notebook that you can rerun. Because you ask ChatGPT this tomorrow or after lunch, and it might give you a different answer, especially to a more sophisticated question. Whereas the notebook is this artifact that exists that then you can extend and share and work with, and eventually even ask ChatGPT, hey, turn this into a module so I can import it into whatever.
That's awesome. Have you like experimented at all with like having it create visualization? Oh, it looks like you just did. Can you write a code to render a visualization based on prime numbers? Well, there we go.
Yeah, and I've done that a lot in Python. I mean, the main draw for our plugin was doing this with Python because it was like the large language model knows Python. And once we realized we had this hooked up, it was like, oh, I bet it knows JavaScript. Of course it knows JavaScript.
ChatGPT has been writing my regular expressions in JavaScript for quite some time now. I
don't write regular expressions anymore.
It thinks that Deno has a plot library, which doesn't exist. It hallucinated this library. So apparently someone's going to have to write this library now.
Yeah, it's true. Like maybe we just have to
Elijah went off camera to go write it.
Hallucinations now. Like this is the world we live in.
So I did, admittedly, that notebook I showed before, it helped me with this. I told it to make this. I was like, can you make this chart for me? So if I instead give it, I'm going to add this to the notebook and I'm just going to tell it, I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? Here's a canvas and let's grab D3 for that notebook. Where did I put display? Yeah, let's grab this too. Ski a canvas sure takes a while. All right.
So yeah,
and then what I can do is I can grab the link to the notebook and I can say, hey, I'm installing some dependencies you can use instead, since this is server-side rendering. You'll have to use the Canvas library. Check it out. And
so
then,
Kevin, one of the issues, of course, with ChatGPT is the training, right? OpenAI's training. Deno is very new, and a lot of the JavaScript is developed for front end with access to the DOM and access to these libraries in a certain kind of way. And so tuning it and letting it know, like, this is how Deno works is something that is still, there's still more work to be done.
Yeah,
for sure.
So it's going now. So what it did there when I told it, I was like, hey, here's the notebook. It was able to figure out what the file ID is because we've given it some instructions about how to read the files. And so it reaches out to our ChatGPT plugin, and then it gets back, here's the entire notebook document kind of in a linear format that the model can read. And then, oh no, that bug that hasn't been solved in the kernel yet. Let's see where that went. Let's just try to run it again. Yes.
There you go.
Okay. There.
Look at that.
Them the primes. Okay.
ChatGPT coming for your job.
You can get the cell again. We fixed it. We'll see what happens from it. And so, like, one of the main ways that people use this, there's a lot of folks that aren't even using Notable directly. They just use it with ChatGPT to do analysis. And, they'll be like, oh, I've uploaded my spreadsheets or I connected to databases. And then it'll just like render the plots inside of your chat, and you can go back and forth with it. But then you have this stable artifact at the very end of the notebook that you worked with. And so I've got a little of both.
Yeah, that actually is super cool. Like, this is one of the better, like, at the end of a session with ChatGPT, I essentially have to, copy paste the JavaScript it generates for me, like, into the source code that I've been working on. This actually, like, pretty faithfully recreates the conversation that you're having, and then makes it, like, hackable from that point. Like, you can go in and tweak the code that it gave you, or
oh, totally,
correct it, version control. Like, you can now version control a output of one of these conversations, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we lost Elijah, unfortunately, which is a minor bummer. Hopefully he's trying to make his way back across the internet. But
he says he has to drop early.
Okay, so he's got to get to his next bit. Sorry, I missed that in the chat. But to be sensitive to your time too, Kyle, I think we'll probably go ahead and wrap it up. The one question I was hoping to ask you before I let you go, though. So Python is sort of the hero programming language of the data science community for good reason. It has lots of libraries that make data science tasks much easier. Like, what are some of the avenues? Like, we've talked about some of them, but what are some of the things that using JavaScript within the context of a Jupyter notebook unlocks for you? Like, what are kind of the areas that you are excited for people to explore?
So I think, like, some of it's really, like, entry level. I don't know if I want to say boring, but it's not like I'm going to paint a universe of let's go do science with Node, but and science with Deno. But really just being able to do documentation with notebooks where you have this literate computing artifact that you can share with other people. I think that's like the first step, is just like being able to express yourself with a notebook and show someone the notebook. Because you could give them the code and whatever else, but you can actually, like, download a notebook, send a notebook to someone else. You can, have it off in, a server. You can put it on GitHub. GitHub will render your notebooks, and it renders the Deno notebooks perfectly. And so, like, that to me is like the very first step. Now, where I want to take things, of course, is that I want people to be able to do data science in the notebooks. Because the reason I started getting involved to help get the Deno kernel out the door was our front-end developers, they could work with Python. We have all this ETL data that is extract, transform, load, where, we're looking at user behaviors and other stuff, where there's stuff on the platform we want to analyze to figure out how do we make our product better. And they could work on it in Python. I was like, I really wish we could just give them a kernel to work with. And I was okay with the JavaScript kernel. And I went to the Deno tracker and I was like, oh, hey, looks like you guys want to do this. So let's figure it out. Let's get it done. And then within a couple of weeks, boom, done. So I just needed it for my front-end developers. So I'm happy other people have it, but I just wanted my front-end developers to be able to work with our own data, and they don't have to go to Python. They can use the language they know. So really, sky's the limit. Whatever you can do normally in Deno, you should be able to do in a notebook. That's it.
Yeah, for sure. And like the accessibility of JavaScript, definitely not to be discounted. There's lots of call it, I don't know if all 20 million professional software developers know JavaScript, but they most of them know at least a little bit.
Everybody has to know some JavaScript.
It's true. You kind of can't escape it, which I feel bad for, like the people that don't like JavaScript, that they can't escape it. But for me, it's actually kind of nice. So yeah, just having access to this type of technology using a programming language that's kind of become the lingua franca of software development is going to end up being pretty powerful. So I'm very stoked about it. I'm excited to get to use it a little more myself, again, because I've been so jealous of the power that my Python developer friends have had. But Kyle, thank you very much for hanging out and sharing your knowledge and your excitement about Deno and Jupyter Notebooks. For those of you that do want to try it out, the 137 blog post was posted in the chat. We'll pop it in the chat one more time so you can check out kind of all the things that we just showed. There's also a link to a blog post from the Notable folks, kind of looking at things from specifically the perspective of the integration that they've just built. If you go to docs.deno.com, we also have the Deno Jupyter command for the CLI documented there. And that's how you're going to actually install the kernel if you want to use the Deno runtime in the context of a notebook locally. So thank you very much. Really appreciate Kyle, Elijah joining us today. And thanks to David as well for joining us on the Deno side. And really hope that all of you out there enjoy hacking on Jupyter Notebook. Thank you very much, folks. See you soon.